Welcome back to Space Thoughts. Today I'm going to talk about the recent landing of a space plane, for lack of a better term, that was orbited back in September of 2022 by the People's Republic of China and just landed back on it was either May 10th or 11th. Now, there's been a lot of speculation circulating about what it was really doing. Apparently, it deployed a smaller satellite, and then I think it did. I recall saying that it was actually retrieved afterwards. But there's a lot of things in the media right now going on. Okay, what was this thing doing? What was this satellite all about? And a lot of mystery surrounding the spacecraft. And of course, it's probably got the intelligence agencies looking very carefully at it, wondering what was going on. And I'm sure during the duration of the flight, U.S. Spacecom was watching it very closely. So what was it doing up there? I mean, obviously, People's Republic of China isn't very transparent about things, and the mission was probably is likely highly classified and will remain so for a long time. But I got to thinking, and there are a lot of parallels with the X-37B, which is basically a mini shuttle that the U.S. Air Force and now the Space Force has been orbiting. In fact, there is one of them still in orbit right now that's been up there for a couple of years at least. And ever since that program started, there's always been a lot of questions. What's it doing up there? Now, obviously, there has been some information released that it was testing materials and doing other functions, but was that really the primary mission of it? And balancing these two, comparing these two, really, I think they're similar. They both doing some sorts of experiments up there, but I think really both have a primary mission that really started, in my opinion, with the X-37B. And I actually wrote about this back in 2015 in the Space Review about what I thought the X-35 was all about. And here's the article in the Space Review: the X-37B program, an American exercise in the art of war. Now, basically, the premise of this article is that the X-37B project, while it may be testing materials and doing other things, one of its primary goals is to actually a deception operation. In other words, putting it up there and actually generating the controversy and the inquiries that it actually did. So, in my opinion, what part of the program was to basically keep the other side worried, keep the Russians and the Chinese worried about what its actual function was, and actually divert resources to actually following it and trying to figure it out where it is. Now, some people may say, well, that's kind of conspiracy, James Bondish type of thing. But really, this is how things kind of work in the real world. You basically want to keep your adversaries in the dark, so that one, they don't know what you're doing, but also so that they divert resources to figure out what it's doing. Let me give you an example. Back about 20-some years ago, when I was down in Virginia Beach area, I would participate in yacht races. Now, I wasn't helming the yacht or anything. I was basically rail meet, which was fine. Had a lot of fun doing it. One time we were going out into the bay, though, Chesapeake Bay, and I was down below in the yacht, and I heard a lot of pinging, and I couldn't figure out what it was. When I came back up, I looked off to the right, or excuse me, the starboard side, and saw a fast attack submarine, and it was on the surface, and it was pinging up through the channel. Now, that was a real head scratcher. Why was this doing it? And we had a bridge officer from I believe it was the Harry S. Truman on board the yacht at that time, and even he was kind of scratching his head. Why is the fast attack submarine on the surface actively pinging up the channel? Well, about 20 minutes after the fast attack came through, along came a nuclear ballistics missile submarine, an Ohio-class submarine, on the surface, which absolutely boggled everybody, because you just don't see those type of strategic assets on the surface that often. And again, everybody was confused. Why is this thing out there? Now, it could have been a multitude of reasons. There may have been a medical emergency where it had to go into the naval shipyard to drop off somebody. But I actually asked a friend. I mentioned this to a friend who, for lack of a better term, had a lot of interesting experiences in life. And basically his comment was, he said, basically what was probably happening is they were surfacing a strategic asset like that, so that spy satellites from our adversaries would be looking at that and not looking at something else. So this is kind of what I looked at with the X-37B in particular, is that this was kind of a deception campaign to draw resources away from other things and have them looking at that instead of looking elsewhere, because these resources, SSA resources, are really limited. That, you know, they can't be everywhere at once, or at least I don't think they can. Maybe that's changed nowadays. And frankly, you know, the whole gist of the article is this is basically driving the goal. One of the goals of the X-37 is to drive the Chinese and the Russians nuts, and you know, and give them some heartburn, and kind of, you know, divert resources and figure out what it's doing. In other words, to make them worry. I think along the same lines, this Chinese space plane probably has a similar function. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't do other things, but I'm saying it's probably taking a page out of the same playbook, which is really taking a page out of The Art of War, Sun Tzu, being a deception operation. In other words, focusing resources both in SSA and focusing intelligence resources to try and figure out what is this thing doing. Now, during the X-37B program, there's a lot of call from NGOs or what have you for more transparency on what it was really doing. But really, that would, in my opinion, that would have defeated the whole purpose of the X-37B program. So if by not knowing what it's doing, people are guessing and looking what's going on up there, and scratching their heads and actually getting heartburn over what it is or it could be doing up there. So that type of speculation is useful in the term of great power competition and keeping the adversary off balance and making them look in other places and such. And I think the same thing goes with this Chinese biplane or a space plane. Now, people are going to say, well, that's just ridiculous. This isn't how things work. Well, this is how things work in the gray world. These are how gray zone operations work. You basically try and fool the enemy. And again, this space plane could have been the idea of, you know, diverting SSA resources away from, you know, other areas where the Chinese may be doing other things. And the same thing with the X-37B. Now, amateur satellite trackers are very good at tracking these things, and of course, you know, they're looking at it, and this gives you a little bit of kind of a pseudo SSA capability as well, and makes it, quote, less secret in terms of where it is. But again, what's it doing? What's the purpose? And again, I think a lot of it is about taking this idea of, you know, bringing deception in here and actually creating heartburn and reaching for the antacid for our geopolitical adversaries, especially in a domain as important as outer space. And again, people say, well, this isn't peaceful use. Sure, why isn't it? I mean, it's a peaceful use of outer space. You're not doing anything really aggressive. You're just basically fooling your enemies. And again, I'm not saying these two spacecraft aren't doing other things, but I think one of the primary missions, one of the undisclosed missions that probably won't ever be disclosed until maybe, you know, 30, 40, 50 years from now, is that it's actually part of a deception operation to actually, you know, get our adversaries worried, and in the case of their space plane, to get us and our allies worried about what it's up to, and focusing resources on it and scratching our heads to try and figure out what's going on. So again, that's kind of just a really rough, based on this article, which I'll actually post a link to in the description. What I think, you know, this whole space, one of the big facets of these two space planes is all about. And again, it's about keeping, you know, your adversary off, you know, on the balls on the back of their feet, and not, you know, guessing as to what's actually going on, and perhaps distracting from what other things are going on. It's part of the game that's actually played in gray zone operations, and it's a big part of space power great power competition. I think another facet of this course is how, you know, whether or not how these operations are affecting, you know, customary international law as to what is acceptable or not. Granted, you know, the X-37B has kind of set a path for customary international law in terms of the operations it did, and I think the Chinese have followed in suit with this space plane and kind of building on it. In other words, it's kind of, you know, it's kind of one thing I warn people about is, like, you know, these novel space activities are really interesting, especially with national security. But you know, our adversaries are watching us, and they're going to say, well, if they can do it, we can do it too. So you know, we talk about norms and stuff. Activities being performed like the X-37 and the Chinese space plane are probably setting norms of behavior that might not be beneficial down the road, but the fact is they're being created. So that's kind of a quick and dirty video on what I think is going on with these two space planes. Again, you know, there's a lot of articles out there, and of course, I'm sure the intelligence agencies are focusing a lot of attention, analyzing what its capabilities are and what it's doing up there. But I think overall, the primary purpose is let's keep them guessing. That's part of the game, and that's part of how things are done in the real world in this era of great power competition. And by the way, we even did this with the Soviets back in the Cold War, so this is nothing new. And of course, I think a lot of this comes from the teachings of Sun Tzu and the art of war. Anyways, we are getting towards the beginning of summer here in the Northern Hemisphere, so I hope you're safe and I hope you're healthy. Oh, and by the way, for the people in the U.S., tomorrow is Memorial Day, and just keep in mind that a lot of those who gave their lives for our freedoms and the benefits that we have here in this great nation. So again, until next time, stay safe.